They said I was selfish for taking down my pool. They said I was being cruel, but they don't know the truth. I did it to protect them. Now, a child is missing, and my empty backyard is a crime scene. The ghost of his wife, Eleanor, lived in the shimmering blue of the swimming pool. Arthur felt her there in the lazy afternoon sun, in the scent of chlorine and the blooming jasmine she'd planted along the fence. He'd sit on the patio, a glass of iced tea sweating onto the wrought iron table, and watch the water dance. It was the heart of their home, the centerpiece of a life they had built together over 40 years. Now, it was just a gaping wound, a constant, beautiful reminder of what he had lost. That peace was shattered by the percussive slap, slap, slap of small, wet feet on concrete, followed by a shriek of childish glee that sliced through the quiet hum of the cicadas. Arthur's eyes snapped open. Two figures, small and wiry, darted across his lawn. Leo, Brenda's 12-year-old, was a blur of motion, his swim trunks already soaked. His 7-year-old sister, Mia, trailed behind, her pink floaties bouncing on her arms. Before Arthur could even push his chair back, Leo launched himself into the air, a cannonball of pure, unadulterated chaos. A tidal wave erupted from the pool, drenching the patio and, to Arthur's horror, Eleanor's prize-winning rosebush. The delicate white petals, the ones he'd spent all morning tending, were now battered and dripping. "Leo!" Arthur's voice was sharper than he intended. The boy surfaced, sputtering and laughing, slicking his dark hair back. He paid Arthur no mind. Mia, more hesitant, dipped a toe into the shallow end. This had become the new rhythm of his grief, a moment of quiet reflection, violently interrupted. Since they had moved in 3 months ago, Brenda, his new next-door neighbor, had treated his backyard as a community water park. There had been no asking, no discussion. The first time, he'd found them already swimming. He had tried to be neighborly, introducing himself and gently explaining that the pool wasn't for public use. Brenda had just smiled a tight, dismissive smile. "Oh, don't be a stranger, Arthur. The kids just adore it. It's so wonderful of you to share." She'd treated his statement of boundaries as a charming invitation. Now, it was a daily siege. He pushed himself up, his knees protesting, and walked to the edge of the pool. "Leo, Mia, you two need to go home." Leo just paddled to the side, hoisting himself out. "But it's hot, Mr. Henderson." "That doesn't matter. This is my property. You are not allowed to be here without my permission." Mia's lower lip began to tremble. Arthur's resolve wavered for a fraction of a second. He wasn't a monster. He just wanted his solitude. He wanted to preserve the sanctity of the one place that still felt like it belonged to him and Eleanor. The sliding glass door next door screeched open, and Brenda emerged, a phone pressed to her ear. She was a frazzled-looking woman in her late 30s, her expression perpetually caught between exhaustion and exasperation. She waved a dismissive hand at Arthur. "Let them be," she mouthed, before turning her back to him and continuing her conversation. Rage, cold and sharp, pricked at Arthur's chest. It wasn't just the trespassing anymore, it was the blatant disrespect, the assumption that his life, his property, his grief were all secondary to her convenience. He walked back to his patio door, slid it open, and went inside. He returned a moment later with a long-handled skimmer. He didn't look at the children. He walked to the pump housing, flipped the loud, rumbling switch to off, and then began methodically, silently, skimming the surface of the water. He pulled out a dead leaf, a beetle, a bright pink hair tie. The children watched him, their boisterous energy slowly deflating in the face of his cold, determined silence. Finally, Leo grumbled, "This is boring now," and climbed out. He grabbed Mia's hand and they trudged back across the lawn, leaving a trail of wet footprints that evaporated almost instantly in the August heat. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Brenda appeared at his fence. "Arthur, can I have a word?" He was watering the battered roses, trying to coax some life back into them. He straightened up, his back aching. "Brenda, the kids were really upset today," she began, her arms crossed defensively. "They said you were being mean." Arthur set the watering can down with a soft thud. "I was cleaning my pool. They were trespassing." Trespassing? They're children. They just want to swim. My God, you have this huge, beautiful pool all to yourself. It seems awfully selfish not to share, especially when you're not even using it. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Not even using it. As if his quiet contemplation didn't count. As if the pool's only value was in being thrashed about in. It's not about sharing, Brenda. It's about safety. It's about liability. What if one of them gets hurt? Are you prepared for that? She scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. They're fine. Leo's a great swimmer. And Mia? She's 7. I've seen her jump in the deep end when Leo dares. Her. You're on the phone. You're inside. You're not watching them. Her face hardened. Are you telling me how to parent my own children? I'm telling you to parent them in your own yard, he shot back, his voice finally cracking with the frustration that had been building for weeks. This is my property. My home. It is not a daycare center. From now on, they are not to set foot in this yard. Am I clear? Brenda stared at him, her eyes narrowed to slits. You'll regret this, she said, her voice low and venomous. People like you, who have everything and hoard it for themselves, you always get what's coming to you. She turned and stalked back to her house. The screen door slammed behind her with the finality of a gunshot. For 2 days, there was peace. Glorious, uninterrupted peace. Arthur sat by the pool and read a book, the silence broken only by the turning of pages and the buzz of a dragonfly. He felt a sliver of hope that his message had finally gotten through. The hope was extinguished on the 3rd day. He was in the kitchen making lunch when a flash of movement outside caught his eye. He looked out the window and his blood ran cold. Leo was on the roof of the low pool shed that housed the pump and filters. He was poised at the edge, his arms spread wide like a gargoyle. Below him, Mia was treading water, her small face tilted up in adoration. "Watch this, Mia! Double gainer!" Leo shouted. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. The roof was a good 12 feet above the water. The deep end was there, but if he misjudged, he didn't think. He threw open the back door and sprinted across the lawn, his old joints screaming in protest. "Leo, no!" His shout startled the boy. Leo's feet slipped on the asphalt shingles. For a horrifying second, he pinwheeled his arms, his eyes wide with panic. He wasn't going to clear the concrete edge. He was going to fall short. Arthur didn't even know he was capable of moving so fast. He launched himself forward, grabbing the front of Leo's oversized swim trunks just as the boy tumbled off the roof. The fabric strained. Arthur's shoulders screamed in agony as he took the boy's full weight, his own feet sliding on the damp grass. He grunted, heaving with all his might, and managed to swing Leo's trajectory just enough so that the boy crashed into the water instead of cracking his skull on the patio. The splash was deafening. Leo surfaced, coughing and terrified. In the chaos, no one had been watching Mia. The shock of Leo's fall had made her swallow a mouthful of water. She was flailing, her little face contorted in a silent, desperate panic, her floaties not enough to keep her head up. Arthur, his shoulder throbbing, didn't hesitate. He dove into the water, clothes and all, and grabbed her. He hauled her too, the steps, her small body trembling against his. She coughed up a lungful of chlorinated water, her cries thin and reedy. He held her for a moment, his own body shaking with adrenaline and rage. He looked from Mia's terrified face to Leo's stunned expression, and then he looked toward Brenda's house. The blinds were drawn, the door was closed. She was probably on the phone again, oblivious. That was the moment the pool died for him. The shimmering ghost of Eleanor vanished, replaced by the ghastly specter of 2 dead children. the heart of. His home had become a menace, a magnet for tragedy, an unbearable risk he could no longer afford. Brenda's threat echoed in his mind. You always get what's coming to you. He wrapped Mia in a towel. Go home, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Both of you. And don't you ever come back here. The next morning, he made the call. The demolition crew arrived 2 days later. The noise was apocalyptic. Jackhammers shattered the concrete patio he and Eleanor had poured themselves one summer. Saws screamed as they cut through the vinyl liner. A backhoe with a massive claw ripped out the steel walls, leaving gaping, muddy wounds in the earth. It was a brutal, violent process, like watching a surgeon perform an amputation with a chainsaw. Brenda stood on her deck, watching the entire spectacle. Her face was a mask of incandescent fury. When the crew broke for lunch, she marched over to the fence. You're really doing it, she seethed. You miserable old man. You'd rather destroy it than let my children have a moment of happiness. I'm protecting your children from your own negligence, Arthur said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He was too exhausted to fight. You're doing this to spite me, to punish me because I'm a single mother doing my best. You couldn't stand to see them laughing, could you? It probably reminded you of how empty and pathetic your own life is now. The words were designed to hurt, and they did. The world narrowed to the space between Arthur and the police officer. Brenda's raw, piercing accusations echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of the suburban night. The flashing red and blue lights seemed to pulse in time with the frantic hammering in Arthur's chest. Sir? Officer Miller's voice was firm, pulling him back from the precipice of shock. I need you to answer the question. Did you see Mia Wallace this evening? No, Arthur managed, the word a dry rasp in his throat. No, of course not. I haven't seen either of the children in a week, not since before the pool was removed. Brenda let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a snarl. Liar! He's a liar! Mia loved that stupid mud pit. She called it her mud puddle kingdom. She was always trying to sneak back there. This was a lie, a complete fabrication. But the officer's eyes flickered towards the dark chasm in the backyard, giving Brenda's words an ounce of plausibility that Arthur couldn't afford. More cars were arriving now, their headlights cutting across the manicured lawns. Neighbors were starting to appear on their porches, silhouettes drawn to the drama. Arthur's quiet, private world was being ripped open and exposed for all to see. Mr. Henderson, I'm going to need you to wait on your patio while we conduct a search of the area, Officer Miller stated. It wasn't a request. Before Arthur could protest, a woman in a sharp blazer strode up the driveway, her expression all business. She had dark, intelligent eyes that swept over the scene, Brenda's hysteria, Arthur's stunned confusion, the gaping hole in the yard, and seemed to process it all in an instant. Miller, what have we got? She asked, her voice calm and authoritative. Detective Rossi. 7-year-old female, Mia Wallace, reported missing by the mother about 30 minutes ago. Mother claims she was last seen heading for this property. There's a history of conflict between the homeowner and the family. Detective Rossi's gaze settled on Arthur. It was a heavy, analytical look that made him feel like a specimen under glass. A history of conflict over what? The pool, Miller supplied, or the lack thereof. Rossi absorbed this, her eyes drifting to the muddy scar in the yard. Okay, get the yard taped off. I want forensics here 5 minutes ago. Get searchlights set up on that pit. I want every square inch of it examined. She turned back to Arthur. Mr. Henderson, I'm Detective Rossi. Why don't you and I have a chat? She guided him to the wrought iron table on his patio, the same table where he and Eleanor had shared 1,000 quiet mornings. The familiar comfort was gone, replaced by a chilling sense of dread. The air was growing cool, but sweat trickled down Arthur's back. He watched as yellow police tape was unspooled around the perimeter of his property, turning his sanctuary into a cage. Huge, Portable floodlights were being erected, and soon the muddy pit was bathed in an unforgiving artificial daylight. "Your neighbor seems to believe you had a problem with her children," Rossi began, her tone maddeningly neutral. She hadn't taken out a notebook. She was just watching him. "I had a problem with her children trespassing," Arthur corrected, trying to keep his voice steady. "They were unsupervised. It was a constant source of anxiety. The pool, it was an accident waiting to happen." "So, you destroyed it," Rossi stated flatly. He flinched at the verb. "I had it removed. For safety reasons." "Tell me about these safety reasons." He recounted the endless incursions, the broken patio furniture, the near misses. He described the terrifying incident with Leo on the shed roof, and Mia nearly drowning. As he spoke, he could hear how it sounded, a litany of complaints from a cantankerous old man. His legitimate fears, when articulated in the cold glare of a police investigation, sounded like petty grievances. "And you spoke to Mrs. Wallace about this?" "Repeatedly. She wouldn't listen. She was dismissive. The day Leo almost fell, I knew I had no other choice. It had to go." "So, the day of this near accident, you decided to spend thousands of dollars to fill in a perfectly good swimming pool," Rossi summarized, a faint note of skepticism in her voice. "That's an extreme reaction, wouldn't you say?" "An extreme situation called for an extreme solution," Arthur said, his frustration growing. "I was trying to prevent a tragedy, detective, not cause one." Across the lawn, Brenda was giving her own statement to another officer. Her voice carried in the still night air, punctuated by sobs. "Hated them, I tell you. He was always yelling, called them a menace. The day he took the pool out, he looked right at me and said he was getting rid of the problem for good. That's what he said. For good." Arthur's head snapped up. "That's not true. I never said that. I said I was getting rid of the risk." But Brenda wasn't looking at him. She was playing to her audience, the sympathetic officer, the gathering neighbors. She was weaving a narrative, and he was the villain. Rossi watched him, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Wallace says Mia had a favorite toy, a little unicorn figurine, bright pink with a rainbow tail. She says Mia took it with her everywhere. You haven't seen anything like that, have you, Mr. Henderson?" "No. I told you. I haven't seen the child." The search in the pit began in earnest. Two forensic technicians in white coveralls moved with methodical slowness, their boots making soft, sucking sounds in the mud. They divided the area with string, creating a grid. The powerful lights bleached all the color from the scene, turning the dark mud into a lunar landscape of gray and black. Arthur sat there for what felt like an eternity, a prisoner on his own patio. Detective Rossi stayed with him, asking questions that circled the same points again and again. His timeline for the day. Who had he spoken to when he had last left the house? Each question was a gentle, probing touch, searching for a weakness in his story. He felt his memories of the quiet, solitary day being twisted into something sinister. His trip to the grocery store. Was he establishing an alibi? The phone call with his sister. Was he seeking advice? His grief for Eleanor was a constant, dull ache beneath the sharp, immediate terror. What would she think of this? Her beautiful garden, their peaceful home, overrun with strangers, lit up like a crime scene. The thought of her brought a fresh wave of despair. He was failing her. He was failing to protect the life they had built. An hour bled into 2. The initial energy of the scene had subsided into a tense, grinding procedure. The neighbors had mostly drifted back inside, though shadows still lingered behind curtained windows. Brenda was now sitting in the back of a squad car, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Arthur felt a flicker of something that almost felt like pity for her. If Mia truly was missing, her pain was unimaginable. But he couldn't reconcile. That image with the venomous woman who had stood at his fence, or the calculating performer he'd witnessed tonight. He was watching the technicians in the pit, their movements slow and almost hypnotic, when one of them suddenly stopped. He knelt, his headlamp focused on a spot near the center of the pit, where the mud was deepest. He spoke quietly into his radio. Detective Rossi's head tilted. She heard the call on her own radio. She stood up without a word to Arthur and walked to the edge of the yellow tape. The other technician joined the first. They conferred in low tones. Arthur's heart began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. He couldn't see what they were looking at, but the shift in the atmosphere was palpable. The routine search had just become something else. Rossi walked briskly to the edge of the pit. The technician pointed. Rossi stared down for a long moment, then turned and walked back towards the patio. Her face was different now. The professional neutrality was gone, replaced by a hard, focused intensity. The analytical gaze had become an accusatory glare. She didn't say a word. She just watched him as another officer approached the pit with an evidence bag and a pair of tongs. Arthur stood up, his legs unsteady, and walked to the edge of his patio for a better view. He watched as the technician used the tongs to delicately lift something from the mud. It was small and caked in thick, dark soil. The officer carefully placed it in the clear plastic bag and sealed it. He then walked it over to Detective Rossi. She held it up under the harsh glare of the floodlights. With a cloth, she carefully wiped away a smear of mud from the plastic. And Arthur's world ended. Through the clear plastic encrusted with his soil, from his yard was a flash of unmistakable, garish color. Bright pink, caked in mud but still visible, was the tiny, twisted horn of a unicorn. The pink unicorn glowed like a radioactive isotope under the floodlights. It was an object of pure childish innocence, now rendered grotesque by the mud and the context. Arthur stared at it, his mind refusing to connect the dots that Detective Rossi's cold, hard gaze was already assembling into a damning picture. I don't understand, he stammered, his voice thin. That can't be. I keep the gate bolted. Forensics will determine how it got there, Mr. Henderson, Rossi said, her voice devoid of any warmth. She slipped the evidence bag into a larger one held by an officer. But its presence requires a more formal conversation. I need you to come with me down to the station. The world began to move in a sickening, slow-motion blur. Two uniformed officers flanked him. He wasn't in handcuffs, not yet, but their proximity was its own kind of restraint. They guided him off his patio, across the lawn he had mowed just 2 days before, and onto the driveway. The murmuring of the neighbors, which had been a background hum, now felt like a physical force. He could feel their eyes on him, their whispers dissecting him. He saw Mrs. Gable from across the street, her hand over her mouth in performative shock. He saw the young couple from 2 doors down, shaking their heads with righteous certainty. In the space of an hour, he had been transformed from Arthur Henderson, the quiet widower, into the neighborhood monster. As he reached the cruiser, he saw Brenda. She was standing by her own front door, her arms wrapped around her son, Leo. The boy was staring at Arthur, his usual bravado gone, replaced by a wide-eyed, fearful expression. But Brenda's eyes were not fearful. They were burning with a cold, triumphant fire. It was the look of a person who had won, and the prize was his destruction. The back of the police car smelled of disinfectant and despair. The door closed with a heavy metallic thud, sealing him in. As the car pulled away from the curb, he looked. Back at his house, his home of 40 years, now cordoned off with yellow tape, looking like a wound in the otherwise peaceful fabric of the street. Eleanor's roses were trampled, the lawn was scarred with boot prints, and the heart of it all was an open, muddy grave. The police station was a sterile, fluorescent-lit maze. He was led to a small, windowless room, painted a sickly shade of beige. There was a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. The air was cold and still. The silence in the room was heavier than the silence in his yard had ever been. Detective Rossi entered a few minutes later, closing the door behind her. She placed a digital recorder on the table, and next to it, the evidence bag containing the muddy unicorn. It sat between them, a silent, irrefutable witness. "This is a voluntary interview, Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice formal as she stated the date and time. "You are not under arrest, and you are free to leave at any time. Do you understand?" He nodded, though the words felt like a lie. How could he be free to leave when his entire life was being held hostage? "Let's go back to the demolition of your pool," she said, her hands steepled on the table. "You claim it was for safety, but Brenda Wallace claims that after the incident with her son, you threatened her. She quotes you as saying, 'I'm getting rid of the problem for good.' That's a direct quote, Mr. Henderson. What problem were you referring to?" "The risk. The danger. Not the children," he insisted, his voice rising. "She's twisting my words. That woman has lied about everything from the very beginning." "Has she?" Rossi countered, her voice dangerously soft. "She lied about her daughter loving to play in the mud? Because my forensics team just found this." She tapped the evidence bag with a single perfectly manicured nail. "Buried 6 inches down in the exact center of that pit. It didn't just fall in, Arthur, it was pushed in. Buried. The way you'd bury something you don't want anyone to find." The implication hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just a suspect. In a missing person case, they thought he had killed her. They thought he had buried her in that pit. And this toy was a piece of the horror they had yet to unearth. "No," he breathed, shaking his head. "No, no, no." "Let me tell you what I think happened," Rossi continued, leaning forward. Her eyes were relentless. "I think you snapped. You're a man who likes his peace and quiet. This family moves in, and suddenly your sanctuary is invaded every single day. You try to be reasonable, but the mother doesn't listen. The kids keep coming. They're reckless. They almost cause a serious accident, and that was the last straw for you. You were filled with a righteous anger, so you got rid of the pool. But that wasn't enough, was it? You wanted to punish Brenda. You wanted to make her feel the same terror you felt when you saw her son on that roof." "That's insane," he whispered, his throat tight. "Is it? Did you call Mia over to the fence, Arthur? Did you tell her you'd made a special mud puddle? Kingdom just for her? She was 7. She would have trusted you. Did you just want to scare her? Leave her stuck in the mud for a while so her mother would finally learn her lesson? And did it just go too far?" Every word was a nail being hammered into his coffin. He could see the story she was building. It was neat. It was plausible. It had a motive, a weapon, the muddy pit, and now physical evidence. His truth, messy and complicated and born of grief and fear, stood no chance against her simple, elegant lie. "I want a lawyer," Arthur said, the words tasting like surrender. Rossi's expression didn't change. She had been expecting this. She nodded slowly. "Of course. You have the right to an attorney." She pushed a phone towards him. "You get one call." His hands trembled as he dialed the only number he knew could help. His younger sister, Helen. She picked up on the second ring. "Arthur?" "It's past 10. Is everything all right?" "Helen," he choked out, his voice cracking. "I'm in trouble. I'm at the police station. They think I did something terrible." He quickly, clumsily explained the situation. The missing girl, the pool, the unicorn. He could hear her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Helen was the practical one, the fighter. "Don't say another word to them, Arthur. Not one word. I'll make some calls. I'll find someone. Just sit tight and say nothing. Do you hear me?" "Yes," he whispered. "Hurry." He hung up. The silence rushed back in, more oppressive than before. Rossi took him to be fingerprinted and have his mugshot taken. The flash of the camera was a blinding white star, searing the moment into his memory. He felt the cold, greasy ink on his fingertips, the rough paper towel he used to wipe them clean. It was a process of methodical degradation, stripping him. of his name, his history, and turning him into a file number and a grainy photograph. He was put back in the interrogation room to wait. An hour passed. He stared at the unicorn on the table until its cheerful colors seemed to mock him. He was adrift in a nightmare, his only lifeline a phone call to his sister. Finally, the door opened. But it wasn't Rossi. It was a young woman, in a rumpled but professional suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase. She had tired eyes but a firm jaw. "Mr. Henderson, my name is Sarah Jenkins. Your sister Helen contacted my firm. I'm your lawyer." She sat down opposite him, placing her briefcase on the table and pointedly moving the evidence bag to the side. "First things first, from this moment on you do not speak to anyone but me. Understood?" He nodded, a wave of relief so profound, it almost made him dizzy. "I've had a brief chat with Detective Rossi," she said, her voice low and quick. "They don't have enough to charge you, but they're holding you. The discovery of the toy gives them probable cause for a much more thorough search of your property. They're bringing in dogs, ground-penetrating radar, the works. They are going to tear your house apart, Arthur." He sagged in his chair. "They won't find anything." "I believe you," she said, and it was the first time all night that he felt anyone did. But right now, belief doesn't matter. Evidence does. They have a hysterical mother, a history of conflict, and a piece of physical evidence that puts the missing girl in a hole you dug in your yard. It's a powerful narrative. We need a better one. She looked him in the eye. So I need you to think. Forget what they're accusing you of. Just think about the last week since the demolition crew left. Has anything been out of place? Anything at all, no matter how small? A delivery you weren't expecting? A noise in the night? Someone in the neighborhood you didn't recognize? He shook his head, his mind a fog of fear and exhaustion. No, it's been perfectly quiet. That's the irony. The quiet is what I wanted. Think harder, Arthur, she pressed gently. The crew finished on Friday. Today is Tuesday. What about Saturday? Sunday? Yesterday? He closed his eyes, trying to force his way through the haze. He saw himself taking out the recycling bin on Sunday evening, the clatter of the plastic and glass, the cool evening air. He remembered walking down the side of the house, along the narrow path, and then he froze. His eyes snapped open. "The gate," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah leaned in. "What about the gate?" "My side gate. It leads from the front yard to the back. I keep it bolted, always." Eleanor was adamant about it. "On Sunday night, when I took the bins out, it was ajar, just by an inch or two. The bolt was slid back." "What did you do?" "I didn't think anything of it," he said, a cold dread washing over him as he realized his mistake. "I thought I must have forgotten to lock it after the crew left, or that the wind had rattled it open. I just slid the bolt shut and didn't give it a second thought." Sarah Jenkins stared at him. The lock on the holding cell door turning was the loudest sound Arthur had ever heard. It was morning. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the night on the cold metal slab, the single flickering fluorescent light overhead humming a maddening tune, while the ghosts of Rossi's accusations circled him in the dark. Sarah Jenkins was waiting for him in the drab hallway. Her expression was professional, but he could see the strain in her eyes. "They're releasing you, Arthur. For now." "Releasing me?" A fragile, foolish hope fluttered in his chest. "Don't get your hopes up," she said immediately, crushing it. "You haven't been charged, but you haven't been cleared. You're the only person of interest. Your house is still an active crime scene. You can't go back there. Your sister is waiting outside to take you to her place." The short walk out of the station was another gauntlet. The morning sun was blinding. On the steps, a small cluster of reporters had already gathered, like vultures drawn to a carcass. A camera flashed, and the rapid-fire clicking sounded like tiny gunshots. "Mr. Henderson, did you do it? Why did you fill in your pool, sir?" Do you have anything to say to the family? Sarah shielded him, murmuring, "No comment, no comment," as she guided him to a waiting sedan. His sister Helen jumped out and threw her arms around him. She was 5 years younger than him, a small bird-like woman with a core of steel. "Oh, Artie," she whispered, holding him tight. "We'll fix this." As they drove away, Helen navigated a detour to avoid their street, but Arthur insisted. "I need to see it." She turned onto his block, and his breath caught in his throat. It was worse than he had imagined. 2 police vans were parked on his lawn. A large white forensics tent had been erected over the muddy pit, a sterile mushroom that had sprouted overnight. The yellow tape fluttered, and he could see figures in white coveralls moving about inside. His prize-winning roses, Eleanor's roses, were gone, trampled into the mud by dozens of careless feet. His home, the quiet testament to his life and his love, looked like a biohazard zone. Worse, a news van was parked across the street, its satellite dish pointed at the sky, broadcasting his humiliation to the world. "Turn," he said, his voice thick. "Let's go." Helen's house was the opposite of his own, full of bright colors, stacks of books, and the smell of lemon polish. It was a cheerful, orderly place, but it felt alien to him. He was an exile. Helen sat him down at her kitchen table with a mug of tea his hands were too shaky to hold. Sarah Jenkins joined them, spreading a few files on the polished oak. "Here's where we stand," Sarah said, her tone all business. "The police are operating on the theory that Mia's body is in that pit. Rossi has ordered ground-penetrating radar. They're looking for any anomaly, any disturbance in the soil that could indicate a burial. If they find something, they'll get a warrant to excavate." Arthur felt a wave of nausea. "They're going to dig for a body in my garden." "It's their narrative," Sarah said, her eyes grim. "And Brenda Wallace is a very compelling storyteller. She's the grieving, terrified single mother. You, unfortunately, are being painted as the cruel, reclusive old man who hated her children. We need to dismantle that story. We need to find out who Brenda Wallace really is." Helen, who had been a research librarian for 30 years before, retiring, straightened up. A familiar, determined glint appeared in her eye. "Leave that to me." While Sarah returned to her office to file motions demanding access to the police's evidence, Helen set up a command center in her study. She started with social media. Brenda's public profile was a carefully curated shrine to struggling motherhood. Photos of the kids, posts asking for recommendations for cheap car repairs, vague but heroic statuses about overcoming adversity. It was nauseatingly effective. By the afternoon, the story had a prominent spot on the local news website. The headline was brutal: "Grieving mother's nightmare, reclusive neighbor questioned in daughter's disappearance." Beneath it was his mugshot, a grainy deer-in-the-headlights image of a terrified old man. They had a quote from an anonymous neighbor. "He was always so quiet, kept to himself. But he got angry about the pool. Really angry." He was being tried and convicted on screens all over the city. His quiet life had been the kindling, and Brenda's accusation was the match. Helen worked tirelessly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She delved into public records, searching for past addresses, court filings, anything. "She's moved 3 times in the last 5 years, Helen noted, frowning at her screen. "From Dayton, Ohio to Indianapolis, now here. That's a lot of upheaval for young kids." She made a few discreet calls, using old librarian databases and networking skills to find phone numbers for people who had lived near Brenda's previous addresses. The first few yielded nothing. But then she spoke to a woman named Maria in Indianapolis, a former landlord. "Brenda Wallace?" "Oh, I remember her," the woman said, her voice wary. "Late on rent every single month, always an excuse. And her son, that boy was a menace. Always in trouble, breaking things. He and his friends flooded the laundry room twice." "Were the police ever involved?" Helen asked, her heart rate quickening. Not that I know of. I just know I was glad when her lease was up. It was something, but it wasn't enough. It established a pattern of negligence, not malice. 2 days later, the call they were dreading came. It was Sarah. Her voice was tight. Arthur, you need to prepare yourself. They found something. A body? He whispered, his blood turning to ice. No, not a body. The GPR detected an anomaly. A dense mass, about 4 feet down, near the old deep end. It's irregular, inconsistent with the surrounding soil. It's enough for a judge. Rossi got the warrant. They're starting the excavation in the morning. The news hit the evening broadcast. Breaking. Police to begin digging in the backyard of Arthur Henderson, the person of interest in the disappearance of 7-year-old Mia Wallace. The implication was clear. They expected to find her. The quiet suburban street was now a full-blown media circus. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that seemed to be crushing the very air from Arthur's lungs. He felt like he was drowning. That night, Helen couldn't sleep. She sat in her study, the glow of the monitor, illuminating her face. The excavation would begin in hours. They were out of time. She stared at the scant information she had on Brenda, feeling utterly defeated. She had searched for Brenda's name linked to lawsuits, criminal charges, anything. Nothing. Then, an idea sparked. She had been searching for Brenda. But Maria, the landlord, hadn't complained about Brenda. She had complained about Leo. Her fingers flew across the keyboard again, this time searching for civil lawsuits or insurance claims in Dayton, Ohio, involving a minor named Leo Wallace. For a long moment, there was nothing, and then a single result popped up from the Montgomery County Clerk of Courts database, dated 3 years prior. Claremont Insurance V.C. Wallace, Brenda. Helen clicked the link. It was an insurance subrogation case. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, her librarian skills helping her cut through the dense text. It was a lawsuit filed by an insurance company against Brenda. But it was the initial claim that made Helen's blood run cold. The claim was from a family named Peterson. They had filed on their homeowner's insurance after an incident at their property. The details were laid out in the attached court documents. The Petersons' 9-year-old son had been playing with his friend Leo Wallace in the Petersons' backyard, near their in-ground swimming pool. According to the report, Leo had dared the Peterson boy to jump from the roof of their diving board into the pool. The boy had slipped, fallen badly, and broken his arm, suffering a mild concussion. It was chillingly, terrifyingly familiar. But that wasn't the shocking part. The Petersons' insurance had paid the medical claim. The subrogation case showed what happened next. Brenda Wallace had hired a lawyer and filed a massive counterclaim against the Petersons. She had claimed their pool area was unsafe, that their supervision was negligent, and that her son, Leo, had suffered severe emotional trauma from witnessing the accident. Helen scrolled down to the final judgment, her heart pounding. Brenda had won. The Petersons' homeowners insurance company was forced to pay Brenda Wallace a settlement for $60,000. Helen leaned back in her chair, a gasp escaping her lips. It wasn't about a free babysitter. It wasn't about a convenient place for her kids to swim. It was a hustle, a predatory, calculated playbook. Find a neighbor with a pool, allow her reckless son to create a dangerous situation, and when an accident inevitably happens, threaten a lawsuit and cash in on the homeowner's insurance. Arthur hadn't just denied her a convenience. He had taken her payday off the table. He had dismantled the centerpiece of her entire scam. And she hadn't just gotten angry, she had retaliated. The frame-up wasn't just an act of spontaneous grief-stricken rage. It was a cold, calculated act of financial revenge. And as the first rays of dawn began to break, Helen knew that somewhere out there, Mia wasn't just a missing child. She was a pawn in a terrifying game, and the police were about to start digging in entirely the wrong place. The first sound of the new day was the groan of heavy machinery. Dawn was breaking, and through the window of Helen's guest room, Arthur could see the first light painting the sky in pale, fragile colors. It felt like the morning of his own. Execution. The excavation was beginning. Just then, his sister burst into the room, her face pale but her eyes blazing with an intensity that startled him. She held a sheaf of printed papers in her trembling hand. "I've got her, Artie," she breathed, her voice a ragged whisper. "I've got the monster." The phone call to Sarah Jenkins was a frantic, high-speed transfer of information. Helen's discovery of the Ohio lawsuit was the bombshell they desperately needed. "Don't let them put a single shovel in the ground," Sarah commanded. "Meet me at Arthur's house. Now!" By the time Helen's sedan screeched to a halt at the end of the block, the scene was already in full swing. A small backhoe was being unloaded from a flatbed truck. The forensic tent had been pulled back, exposing the muddy pit like an open wound. Detective Rossi stood near the yellow tape, conferring with a man in a hard hat. Sarah Jenkins, already there, intercepted them. She took the papers from Helen, her eyes scanning the legal documents with incredible speed. "This is it," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fury. "This is the whole damn story." Together, the three of them marched towards the police tape. A uniformed officer put out his hand to stop them. "Sorry, ma'am, this is a restricted area." "Get me Detective Rossi," Sarah snapped, holding up the court documents. "Tell her if she breaks ground on this property, I'll be filing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against her and this department for malicious prosecution and willful destruction of evidence. Tell her I have proof this entire investigation is a fraud." The officer, taken aback by her ferocity, spoke into his radio. A moment later, Detective Rossi strode over, her face a mask of annoyance. "Ms. Jenkins, this is an active crime scene. Your client has no business being here." "My client is the victim of the crime, Detective, and you're too blind to see it," Sarah shot back, shoving the papers into Rossi's hands. "Read this. It's a lawsuit from 3 years ago. Dayton, Ohio. A family with a pool. A convenient accident involving Leo Wallace. And a $60,000 insurance settlement for his mother's trauma. Sound familiar?" Rossi's eyes scanned the first page. Her professional composure flickered. She read on, her expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief, and then to a dawning, sickening horror. The pattern was undeniable. The modus operandi was identical. She looked from the papers in her hand to the muddy pit, then back to Arthur's pale, worn face. She had been building a case against a grieving widower while the real perpetrator was playing her like a fiddle. "The anomaly your radar found is probably a discarded engine block from 1972, Sarah pressed, her voice dripping with scorn. "You've been manipulated. While you've been terrorizing my client, the real victim in all this, a 7-year-old girl, is God knows where." Rossi stood silent for a long moment. The sounds of the neighborhood, a distant lawnmower, a barking dog, rushing into the void. Then, she turned and raised her hand, signaling the backhoe operator. The engine noise died. She pulled out her phone and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Get a unit to Brenda Wallace's address, and get me Child Protective Services now. Tell them to meet me there." She looked at Arthur, and for the first time, he saw not a prosecutor, but a police officer. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice heavy with a regret she couldn't yet fully articulate. "I think we've made a terrible mistake." The scene at Brenda's house was swift and surgical. When Rossi's team arrived, Brenda came to the door, her face arranged in the perfect mask of a grieving mother. But when she saw the phalanx of officers and a stern-looking woman from CPS, her composure cracked. They separated Leo immediately, taking him into a different room while Rossi confronted Brenda with the Ohio lawsuit. The boy away from his mother's, Domineering presence for the first time was a bundle of nerves. A detective trained in interviewing children sat with him, not as an accuser, but as a potential rescuer. "Leo, we know about what happened in Ohio," the detective said gently. "We know your mom gets you to do things that aren't right. We're not angry at you, Leo, but we need to know where Mia is. Her life could be in danger. You're her big brother. You have to protect her." The boy's tough facade crumbled. Tears streamed down his face as a torrent of confession poured out of him. The whole thing was a plan. Brenda had been enraged when Arthur removed the pool, ruining her scam. So she'd devised another one. A twisted plot for revenge and a potential payday from a lawsuit against the city for failing to protect her daughter from the neighborhood predator. The night Mia disappeared, Brenda had driven her 2 hours away to a cousin's dilapidated farmhouse. Mia thought she was on a special secret vacation. It was Leo's job to plant the evidence. His mother had shown him how to jimmy the bolt on Arthur's side gate with a piece of wire. Late one night, he had snuck into the yard and buried the pink unicorn deep in the mud, right where his mother had told him to. While Leo was confessing, state troopers were already en route to the cousin's address. They found Mia in the living room, watching cartoons, safe and utterly oblivious to the nightmare that had consumed an entire neighborhood and nearly destroyed an innocent man's life. Brenda Wallace was led from her house in handcuffs. The triumphant, hateful mask was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. She couldn't believe her perfect story had unraveled. The media, who had been camped outside Arthur's house, swarmed hers, their cameras capturing her downfall with the same predatory zeal they had captured his persecution. Arthur was formally, publicly, and completely exonerated. The next evening, Detective Rossi came to Helen's house. She stood on the doorstep, hat in hand, and offered a deep, sincere, and humble apology. She explained that all charges against Brenda were being pursued to the fullest extent of the law, and that Leo and Mia were now in the care of the state, awaiting placement with other family members. Returning home was the strangest part of all. The police tape was gone, but the scars remained. His lawn was a patchwork of mud and ruined grass. His front door was smeared with black fingerprint dust. And in the backyard, the pit remained, an ugly, gaping reminder of the abyss that had nearly swallowed him. In the days that followed, the neighborhood tried to atone. Mrs. Gable from across the street brought over a still warm apple pie, her eyes unable to meet his. The young couple left a pot of orchids on his doorstep with a card that simply said, "We are so sorry." He accepted their offerings with a quiet, tired grace. He knew they weren't malicious people. They were just drawn to the simple, ugly story, and he had been cast as the villain. Weeks later, the media had moved on, and a fragile quiet had returned to the street. Arthur sat on his patio, a glass of iced tea sweating onto the wrought iron table. Helen was with him, sitting in the other chair, Eleanor's chair. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked softly, nodding towards the pit. He looked at the hole in the earth, the source of all his pain. He thought of the shimmering ghost of his wife and the ghoulish specters of accusation that had replaced her. He could fill it with dirt, pave it over and try to forget. But he knew he couldn't. "I'm not going to fill it in," he said, a new kind of certainty in his voice. "I'm going to make it a garden, a sunken garden, with a stone path and a bench right in the middle. I'll plant Eleanor's favorites, peonies, lavender, and those white roses. I'll make it a place of life." Helen smiled, a real, warm smile. He looked out over the scarred earth, but he didn't see the mud or the memory of the police tape. He saw what it would become. He was taking the ugliest place in his life, a space that had been defined by accusation, fear, and a profound violation, and he was going to reclaim it. He would fill it not with concrete, but with beauty. He would find peace not by erasing the past, but by planting a future in its place. The quiet that settled over him then was different from the one he had sought before. It was not the silence of solitude or loss. It was the deep, resonant peace of a man who had walked through hell and had chosen to plant flowers on the other side.